Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us at the Centre for Print Research Lunchtime Lectures. Today, we've got Sofie Boons, who's a senior lecturer in design crafts at UE, and also is working with doing a lot of research with the Centre for Print Research. And I'll leave Sofie to introduce herself more and tell you about what she's been doing. Thanks ever so much, Sofie.
Thank you, Angie. So this presentation, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to speak to everyone. This presentation is about my PhD research titled Neo-gemstones, an alchemical jeweler's exploration of lab-grown crystals and related technologies, proposing innovations whilst challenging context terminology and underlying assumptions. The longest title I was allowed to have. So every word that we are allowed to have, I have used. In the presentation, I hope to cover the rationale for my research, the then established research questions. I will reflect on the methodology and methods chosen to respond to these questions before then shedding some light on the context around the research and providing a slightly more in-depth overview of the 3 case studies conducted as part of the research before then drawing some conclusions that came out of the research, if there ever is such a thing. The alchemical dream to investigate grown crystals, as the title alludes, an experiment with the growing of gemstones, has been quite a sort of obsession, or a thing that was in my mind for quite a while, pretty much after visiting a facility in Germany where they were growing laser crystals. And with that hands-on engagement or introduction to those materials, I realized that there was a huge gap in my own knowledge and a gap in understanding these materials for what they were, and particularly thinking of them as synthetic and less valuable, and then sharing that with the next generation of jewelers as well. But it wasn't until quite a bit later at the Centre for Print Research, when I got a job here, that I was able to tackle this research and then form some questions that I wanted to answer around my research position, which aim to look at the creative opportunities these man-made or lab-grown gemstone materials and their scientific processes provide jewelry artists, and why the technology and the materials in existence, despite having been around since the 19th century, haven't really resulted in significant innovations prior to the PhD in this context of jewelry. The research project was then designed around or in alignment with the practice-led research framework documented by Graham-Sullivan, which was developed to conceptualize art practice as research by considering the relationships between the theories and practices that inform how art can assume its potential as a creative and critical form of human inquiry. This is a quote from Sullivan. The central triangle, which shares conceptual edges with the 3 adjoining triangles representing other research practices in this diagram, is the making space. So whilst the project was grounded in that studio experience, in the making, throughout the project, the research sort of moved eclectically across those permeable barriers. And before I carry on with sort of telling you what I did, I think it's quite important in this project, and turned out to be more important as I did the research, to look at the context. I'm certainly not alone in being fascinated by gemstones, which have really a long history of captivating human imaginations. Gemstones are known to have inspired myths. I mean, most movies, the best ones, are always about stealing a big gem, isn't it? So they have been throughout time greatly valued. And I would say that human ingenuity can probably be traced back as far as our fascination with gemstones, which is why it's not unimaginable to consider that there's been a human desire to recreate and imitate that which is considered valuable, including gemstones, for a very long time too. So pearls were imitated in great numbers by the Romans, and later Assyrian paste, a glass imitation for gemstones, was super popular in Europe. It is, however, not as I mentioned earlier, until the 19th century that we were actually successful in growing crystals as they grow in nature. Even though the knowledge of the nucleation of crystals can be traced a little bit earlier on, a bit back further, the necessary advancements of technology that accompanied the 19th century resulted in the first man-made crystals being successfully created. There were quite a few who were experimenting with crystal growth in the 19th and early 20th century, but it is generally Auguste Vernoy who is considered the father of the technology. Mainly because of his fusion growth method in 1902, which led to the first commercial production. So there was enough capacity to grow quite a large number of crystals with his technique. And this technique is still used today, but also led to the development of a range of other techniques. The influx of these then man-made crystals at that time in the market ultimately inspired the development of the branch of mineralogy and geoscience we now know as gemology. I, as a jeweler, didn't know, but it was really because of the lab-grown materials entering the field that gemology as a practice of distinguishing, making decisions between what is one and what is the other, that was established. Early gemology books, like Gemstones by G.F. Herbert, depict these man-made crystals as less valuable, even going as far as referencing the knowledge to create these crystals and the techniques as weapons. So to date, in fact, there is still only really for jewelers gemological literature available on the subject, and that still sort of aims to distinguish mined stones from man-made imitations and how they want to phrase it. Here is an example from an early gemology book describing the likelihood of diamond being produced in 1912. It is generally accepted today that diamond has never yet been artificially formed, and moreover, with the means at our disposal, its production in a factory or laboratory is unlikely in the extreme. Jewelers may therefore rest assured that there is no risk of catastrophic disruption of their trade by the provision of supply of cheap synthetic diamonds, and that anyone claiming to have produced such stones is suspect. In contradiction to the writing of Herbert, laboratory-grown diamonds are no longer a hypothetical catastrophe for the trade. They are being produced in large numbers using chemical vapor deposition. Here you can see a reactor in Newcastle upon Tyne that I visited, or HPHT processes. And so even though lab-grown gemstones have been around for a century, the debate on their position in the industry has, since the sort of more recent influx of lab-grown diamonds in the market, gained a lot more momentum. So this is a post that was only shared with me a few days ago, because the price of diamonds is currently tanking, so it's 20% less valuable a diamond today than it was last year. And so the debate is very much still going on. With the techniques to produce these lab-grown diamonds, but also other gemstones, now commonly understood, and because these diamonds and these materials are chemically and physically identical, their distinction sort of has become impossible for the general gemologist or the jeweler. You need highly specialist equipment to still make a distinction, and even then you are often guessing, because it's then looking for defects that you would expect to see in certain locations that may be still copied in labs as well. It is fair to say, though, that in other industries, crystal growth is driving innovations in technology, medicine, electronics, even nuclear physics experiments. Physics experiments now use grown gems. And my supervisor or supporter from the project, Dr. Daniel Wrights, he's been saying that we live in the crystal age. So it's, he believes that the Iron Age, the Bronze Age today is the crystal age. We could not live without crystals. With, of course, a serious interest in crystal growth in a range of industries, there's a vast amount of literature dedicated to the documenting of techniques, reporting of research, exploring of applications in relation to crystal growth. There are research centers that are specialized, conferences and journals on the subject. But the literature, this literature, is quite scientific in its nature, and I would sort of say largely inaccessible to the jewelry designer. And though some of the techniques documented, we know now, would have great impact or could be very interesting from a jewelry perspective, few innovations were successful at making their way into the jewelry field, where most of these man-made gemstones are still mainly produced to imitate mined gems. So having established that the literature in the jewelry field dedicated to these man-made crystals is limited, it was important for the study to be expanded, the contextual view to be broadened in order to collate sort of richer data and opinions on the topic from the jewelry community directly. This was intended to establish a sort of, albeit momentarily, insight into contemporary sentiments in relation to these man-made materials and their usage in a jewelry context, or in other words, to sort of gain an insight into the situation. I felt there was therefore a necessity to also expand my catchment area and travel to the region of Europe most known for its working with and use and retail of gemstones, and the heart of the gemstone trade pretty much in Europe, although that is slightly under threat as well. So that is Idar Oberstein. And so thanks to funding from the DAAD, Erasmus+, I was able to plan 2 research residencies of each 2 months in what is often referred to as the valley. And yes, the bollards are made out of gemstone and the fountain is made out of gemstone. You literally are surrounded by gemstone in this city. An extensive investigatory schedule was devised consisting of interviews, visits to trade fairs, museums, companies, attending lectures, all supplementing the continuous monitoring of press coverage, trade reports, and social media, as far as I was, of course, able to do that on my own. And then the research residencies and further visits to the valley were also then supported by the University of Applied Sciences in Trier, and in Idar Oberstein again, where the department in gemstone and jewelry is really unique in the world, the only one to teach jewelry design students how to work and cut gems actually left. And they allowed me access to specialist equipment and also to gain more insight into the processes to work with gems. And then I guess there's 3 main findings that I took from my contextual review in terms of why people are using lab-grown gems, because there is an increase in use in lab-grown gems in the context, not necessarily novel ones, but those that often imitate others. And so one of the first examples is, certain interventions that are become possible because the materials likely are cheaper or more accessible to them. So cutting them in the center or doing innovative things with them. You would never do that with a diamond because it would just be too wasteful in theory. So you saw that as a reason for people to navigate towards these materials. They're also considered by some to be more sustainable, a key driver for particularly larger corporations like Pandora, who now have, I think last year decided that every diamond they include, which isn't that many, it will be a lab-grown diamond in the UK. But they are the largest retailer in the world. So them saying this, whilst they're not the largest diamond retailer, this is a big shift in the industry. And additionally, in other industries where lab-grown gems sort of attract higher prices than mined gems, they are favorited because of their reliable properties and the quantities with which they are available. So particularly for grit, which is what you're looking at on the right-hand side, you will pay much more for a lab-grown diamond, for example, than you would for a natural one. those who do not wish to use lab-grown gemstone materials, and there were quite a few in the valley, not all of them willing to speak to me, usually cite their artificiality as a reason. So there's a long history of us believing that gemstones have magical powers. Their use in rituals and in the holy sphere can be traced back thousands of years. And these ideas, it's speculated they've become part of our cultural memory and society's consciousness. And this pre-configured, often symbolic language is then now being tapped into by clever advertising agencies in order to increase the market value of mined gemstones. So in response to the influx of lab-grown diamonds and likely, large marketing campaigns have then, been campaigning and changing our, the voice has changed in order to ensure that it's not anymore about how fantastic a diamond scores against certain criteria, but that it comes from the earth and that it is a natural material. Real is rare has been one of the key sidelines, so it's been clear what the purpose for this was. And yeah, it's a large amount of money that's being spent, so 70 to 80 $1 million of generic marketing materials for just the material diamond. So there's been an addition to the 4 C's as a response as well. I don't know if you all know the 4 C's. Cut, color, clarity, and carat. Because lab-grown gems can perform very well against those C's, there's now been a 5th added. I know some people will know because they've read my thesis, but who hasn't read my thesis, could you give a guess? What could it be, the 5th C? If we know that the diamond industry is lobbying for it. It's not conscious, which it should be. Yes.
Certified? Or...
Yes. Oh my God, yes, perfect. Certificate. So your there's now 5 C's, the certificate. Your diamond can perform as well as you want against the other C's, but if it doesn't have a certificate stating that it is a natural diamond, then it doesn't even matter. The value will tank, supposedly. As it has become then more challenging to rely on gemology for the identification and ultimately the assurance of value, diamond mining companies in particular have in recent years amped up the pressure and lobbying for legislation to distinguish the 2 identical materials by origin in the marketplace, ultimately aiming for rules and regulations to determine the terminology. So to do that, they want to use the certain words that we can use to describe materials. And so here it's unfair or deceptive to use the word ruby, sapphire, emerald, topaz, or the name of any other precious or semi-precious stones, or the word stone, birthstone, gem, gemstone, or similar term to describe a laboratory-grown, laboratory-created, manufacturer name-created, synthetic, imitation, or simulated stone, unless such a word or name is immediately preceded with equal conspicuousness by the word laboratory-grown, laboratory-created, manufacturer-created, or some other word or phrase of like meaning, or by the word imitation or simulated, so as to disclose clearly the nature of the product and the fact it is not a mined gemstone. So yes, the aim is really transparent, depicting these man-made crystals as unnatural, artificial, and fake. It's a battle of words that's been playing out in the industry for many years and has ultimately influenced our appreciation of man-made materials. And I always like to sort of have a think about the word synthetic, which seems to be the more preferred term and quite popular in the general usage to describe these materials. In fact, there was a BBC discussion where I got invited and they kept calling them synthetic. The use of the word synthetic is obviously known to have quite negative connotations for consumers who are looking for natural produce, but the debate around sort of the appropriate defining of materials as natural or artificial is definitely not a new one. And there are some sort of thinkers in this space that also claim it's not such an easy one. It's not as black and white. Ezio Manzini, for example, proposes artificiality as a scale where some materials are more artificial than others. And the mining industry has keen to align with the writings of Umberto Maturana, promoting the sort of ahistorical and autopoetic, no impact of humans, for mined crystals being less artificial than the man-made ones. In marketing literature, there is plenty of literature prescribing benefits for aligning your product with ongoing trends that see consumers preferring natural produce over synthetic alternatives. But there is definitely not really a clear natural versus artificial juxtaposition. Because is it really as easy to map all these materials? I've asked myself in my PhD. I compare here cotton and laboratory grown diamond and sort of say that actually cotton, there is many more processes involved with producing it, yet we often consider that if it's done in the right way is organic, but then the lab grown diamond is considered synthetic. And the term has been, I went to archives and I found the discussion about synthetic, or the word, even dating back to 1914. So from the moment these materials entered the market, it's been a discussion whether they should be called synthetic or not. And we still haven't really resolved the process. Authenticity in relation to materials is therefore sort of not a clear cut concept, and there's not pragmatical categorization. There was a really nice book, Genuine Fakes by Lydia Pine, where she concludes objects don't have an intrinsic morality to them. Context is everything. And I say my thesis, when context is everything, it's more than ever important value systems and the social constructs holding them in place are questioned not only by those with an interest in them commercially, but by all of us appropriating the materials as designers and buying them as consumers. Which is why I make the suggestion for a new term, Neo-gemstone, as an alternative. Alongside proposing and trademarking this new term, I also created critical designs to engage the public in the contemplation of the context I uncovered. This is, for example, a pair of earrings which has lab-grown diamond and mined diamond sets, each in one of the studs. And on the stud, you have the word real or fake engraved. And then, yeah, as soon as the earrings are worn, these markers that show the difference can no longer be read because they're inside the ear, and then you can't tell the difference anymore. This is two sets of signet, or this is a signet ring formed out of quartz, one made out of man-made quartz and the other out of lab-grown quartz. The area where normally there's sort of an identifying marking seal in a traditional signet ring, here shows the natural growth patterns, and I do say natural because both these materials showcase them, and the underpinning sort of mathematical crystal structure that is sort of the stimuli for this growth pattern is identical. So whilst there is slight differences in the way they've been grown, you can still see that there is evidence of growth in both, and therefore not such a big difference. And for the series where the waist, the necklace and ring were produced, that visualizes the average amount of kimberlite rock that needs to be mined in order to produce the incorporated or referenced diamond. So this has a scale on it, and there's a tiny diamond in this necklace, sort of trying to showcase that you can feel the weight or the impact for this 0.0005 carat diamond, because craters for the mining of diamond can now even be seen from space, so a huge amount of rock needs to be moved. Whilst I was conducting my contextual review, I was also working on these 3 case studies, which I'll briefly run through to gain a hands-on experience using these lab-grown materials. The first case study was established to document and identify currently non-utilized material, gemstone materials, and their suitability for jewelry, with a particular focus on unused waste in this area. During a visit to the diamond lab, I was shown a large selection of CVD offcuts, seeds and growths that were not desirable to pursue a fine, brilliant cut. And as a jewelry artist, this type of waste I thought was really interesting to use in jewelry pieces, because they show sort of the real transformation this material has been undergoing, and yeah, sort of a shimmering, beautiful, out of the box technique. Yeah. Interesting waste materials were really everywhere. And so I also set up a project with 2 companies, Afghan Lapaport in Germany and Medidea. And the teaching project, which was funded by a Marie Somerville grant, engaged 9 participants in the retrieval and usage of this waste following an urban mining experience at the company. And earlier I had identified, particularly in this company, Lapaport slab technique, that there were really pots and pots and pots of waste diamond grit. Company offers a sort of reapplication as a service of grit for old electroplated tools. And electroplating being a reversible process, the now flattened grit is removed from all tools and collected before a fresh layer of grit is applied. And then the reclaimed grit, precious by nature but not really usable in the context of tooling, as it would be too expensive to be reshaped, is just stored. After a discussion with both of these companies, Julia Wild from the University of Applied Sciences Trier in der Oberrhein, a workshop was then devised for these bachelor students at the university to then go and collect the materials. But as soon as the students were there and they were shown around, and the company employees sort of gained an understanding of how an artistic mind works, and that actually there was other materials that might be of interest, the participants really got into urban mining in a much deeper level, and we left with boxes and boxes of materials, much more than just diamond grit. Following this workshop, I sort of reflected on the use of these materials and also the process of urban mining, and I've sort of reflected on what it means to change and how the methodology and methods that you can use change your processes as an artist. And so a final showcase of the outcomes will be presented in Munich, because I'll have all the students present the work there as well, which will be the first time we'll all be together. And these are some quotes of the students on how they felt their practice was impacted by using this different material that they didn't expect to come in. Case study 2 is the second case study. It was all the idea that if I wanted to have innovations in these materials, I might need to go down to growing crystals. And the first step was, I thought maybe collaborating with crystal growers is the easiest way I'll have an impact on growing. So could the collaboration yield creative and innovative outcomes was the question. The first collaboration I set up was with Daniel Reitz, and the second collaboration was with the organic chemistry department in Bristol University. Daniel had been focusing his attention on glow-in-the-dark materials, but had never used them in a jewelry context. In 2013, he produced a sort of new type of strontium aluminate in the form of a transparent crystal with similar luminescence effects, like pigments, for example, that we do know around. Following exposure to a few minutes of illumination by sunlight, unlike traditional gemstone materials, their entire volume emits light for many hours. And so whilst the start of the research, I did not immediately sort of know what to do with this material, we agreed that we'd look into applying it into a jewelry context, shaping it so that it could be used by other jewelers. But as the sort of collaboration established and progressed, I was also allowed to work with more and more material and sort of look at certain effects that were taking place. Like, for example, when you engrave it, light pools on the edges and you get unique effects happening, which I think as a jewelry artist were really exciting to explore. And a further transmutation of the effect of light. Stone was also cut with a single column of phosphorescent material in the center, and sort of showcasing how reflecting the light in other materials could be quite interesting in the dark. And this is, for example, another sort of a traditional emerald cut would have a step cut And rather than having all the steps created with material, you create extra steps with light. So sculpting with light became something that I was really interested in with these materials. And also, if you combine them with other materials, light travels through certain materials. Thicker and thinner will have different effects, and you can get really amazing optical illusions. And Daniel is now working with me also on investigating other colors that glow in the dark. So that's quite still exciting. And then the opportunity, sort of reflecting on that, to work with a new material can be really inspirational for artists, and it's been a driving force for other sci-art collaboration. Was no different in this instance. Yeah, it was a really exciting challenge to be given. I've also worked with Bristol University, Dr. Simon Hall, Jason Pottery, and Michaela Whitehurst. But that collaboration ended up focusing more on pigments and colors. And neither of the collaboration gave me access to growth techniques hands-on, which is what led me in a sort of frustration to the third case study, where I had crystals growing in sort of at the heart of it. I wanted to do it myself. First, that meant experimenting with sugar, salt, and alum in a crystal growth sort of DIY at-home kitchen workshop, so that I could understand supersaturation, growth processes, and what happened, and also could use it as an ideation tool to come up with some of the design ideas that I thought were most interesting to then pursue with flux growth of ruby, which was successfully achieved here at CFPR with very quite DIY conditions, and then incorporating that process, which I reflect on as a jewelry designer, into the jewelry creation process. These are some of the examples. The fact that crystals can contain impurities, we call them inclusions, was explored to sort of grow around metal structures. And also thinking about growing in situ in settings, which really puts the practice of setting, which usually holds a stone in place after the stone was created. Now you're growing inside the piece. It really turns that process upside down. Evidence in these experiments in particular are the individual shapes each crystal displays and the unpredictable direction of the growth of the crystals. And yeah, this unpredictability in growth, I think, is really incredibly interesting. You're really collaborating with nature, with the process, and every time you grow something, you have something totally unique appear. Spontaneous nucleations, just to point those out as well, with crystal growing patterns aligning also to the metal host structures, happen sort of without intention, but resulted in sort of really exciting spontaneous things. So yeah, we gain the illusion that we can control everything, but with crystal growth, actually, there's a lot we can't control, which is quite exciting as an artist. And I've also been using all the waste products, which is definitely an area I think has got very good opportunity, because you can use waste from the industry to grow or start the growth, and you can create a little bit of your own waste, so you can keep the process going without much external input. And then I conclude with sort of to just impress you with all the with a list of all the contributions to knowledge I tried to make without going into too much detail. But yeah, now my point is to try and speak to many people and try and make a change. It's very important that we all start to think about these materials differently, or there will be no innovation. And if anyone is in Munich by any chance, then feel free to pop around 12 to 15 March. I'll be exhibiting PhD work and more urban mining collaborations. And that's it.